All right, welcome everybody. This is the second video in our Making Hands series. Also good for hollowing, so you'll see today I'm actually not going to do the next hollowing step. I'm just going to work on cutting the fingers, more details, and bending the hand. So if you are ready for hollowing, feel free to skip ahead to the third video in the series. So right now I've got hand pretty flat. This is the back of the hand I've done a little work on. Here's the front or the palm of the hand. So you might have noticed I've done some carving here to start to kind of get the curve. A big thing you want to pay attention to is the thickness on the side. So looking at this, I still have some work to do carving away some on that finger. If I flip it the other way, still my pinky still has this squared off look. So if your clay is soft enough, you can kind of smooth and manipulate, or you can continue to use your loop tool to cut away some of that thickness. All right, so I'm gonna show you about bending and cutting the fingers. I think what we'll do is we'll start with cutting the fingers. And obviously for this video, I'm not gonna do all of them, but I'll just show you one or two. So to start with, I'm gonna do the pinky, just because that's kind of where I am. Now that I've done some curving and I feel like the shape is ready for just some final shaping, now I'm gonna cut. Remember, the benefit of waiting is that you don't make these pieces very fragile, because every wiggle is going to put cracks in here, and the more you do it, the more it's going to break. So obviously I've got this kind of angular edge in here. So now that I've broken it open, I can get my tools in and I can start to round it just like I did with the other, like the earlier steps. I'm just kind of cutting away to try and get it to be a little more rounded. My clay is still pretty soft, so I'm still able to do some like pinching and manipulating that way. So just by like simply pressing, I'm starting to get more of that pinky shape. Now, some other things that are really helpful for you to be thinking about while creating these fingers and kind of finishing up. Thinking about the knuckle joints, which I know I talked about last time on the back. Sometimes it's nice to take some fresh clay, really smooth it in. And that's a way that you can kind of get the knuckle to come to life. And it makes sense once you get all of them on, they start to look really realistic. You also want to think about the way that your pinky bends. So you have these different joints. So I know if I have my first joint right here, that if I'm bending it, I'm going to keep it pretty angular. And then at a certain point, I'm going to have the other bend in that. So if I'm ready, I can start some of those bends to kind of get the shape ingrained in the clay. All right, so now I would do that same thing with each of the fingers, so I feel pretty good about the shape. If I feel like I don't have a sharp enough knuckle here, I can always add clay, or if it's soft enough, I can kind of push and smear it to get a little bit more of an angle. Okay, I'm gonna talk about fingernails, and then I'm gonna talk about bending the whole hand. So fingernails, it's always nice to have an extra lump of clay around so you can kind of support what you're doing, especially once you start bending it, because you don't wanna bend it forward and then bend it back. So I'm gonna work on this little guy's pinky fingernail. The best tool to use for this is something that looks a lot like a fingernail, but there are lots of tools that you can use to do this manipulation as well. So to start with, I'm just gonna show you my beautiful finger. If you notice, the nail sits underneath the skin, so we're gonna wanna push it down, and then it extends beyond the skin. Okay, so on the sides, it's still under that skin. We've got this curved, basically U shape that wraps around the finger. So right here on that finger that I just was working on, I'm gonna take my tool that's kind of got that finger shape, and I'm gonna start by pushing down just a little bit to create a little bit of a curve. Now on the sides of the finger, it's more of a straight edge, kind of comes straight up. Remember that U shape. Okay, so now I've got this U, and now you can kind of go and clean it up a little bit. You know, it's usually you don't have a super defined edge. Okay, so now it's starting to look like a fingernail. The final part is more so on the bottom of the finger, or a little bit of the bottom. I'm just gonna take and push a little bit of clay up. My other finger is kind of holding it in place. So it's just a way to make it look like the nail is separate from the finger below. Okay, so now all of a sudden you can see there's some realism in that fingernail. You can kind of press it down if you need to. So just a simple trick. A good trick for getting like knuckle lines is taking a similar type of tool and just starting to kind of carve lightly across, right? It's up to you how defined you want to make those lines, but once you start getting them together, it really helps. All right, the last thing I wanted to show you in this video, if I want to keep bending this, remember I bent that one finger. If I don't do anything with it, it might fall back, it might hold its shape, but really if you're going to bend the whole hand, let's say I'm going to do something like this, you want to work on it while it's still soft enough to bend. So I'm going to kind of do that same thing now, and I'm just going to start with manipulating the clay, keeping in mind that I want to focus on the way my hand actually bends, right? My palm stays pretty straight, and then the finger joints start to bend. So I'm kind of pushing and shaping to get what I want. Now, once I cut the rest of these fingers apart, I can start to do things like having them at different distances, because we don't often go like this, right? It might be more like this, where some of the fingers extend out and some do not as much. So those are some basics. Now, this is something that needs to stay in this position. So while it's drying, maybe you set it up on that clay so it holds that position, or you can use, a sponge, some newspaper, whatever you need to do to get it to stay in that position. And if you'd like it to sit like this, then you just have to put your clay behind it to support it as you're working. So those are the basics with the next step. In the next video, I'll show you how you can actually hollow out this form.